Welcome to the Food Startups Podcast.
Welcome to episode 36 of the Food Startups Podcast. This is Danny Miklowitz. I'm here with my co-host, Matt Arendt. Matt, I haven't seen you in a little while. What have you been thinking about? What's been on your mind?
Well, I actually made my first visit to a cashew farm in the Caribbean coast of Colombia last week. So cashews have been on my mind.
Yeah, this is like a lifelong dream realized, huh?
Yeah, I mean, I love what Rich said on last week's podcast. These tycoons, these people that are very successful, they know how to see value where others kind of overlook value. And this is like, as he mentioned, Moneyball with Billy Beane and the Oakland A's. And it's just amazing to me. This fruit, nut is maybe like 15 to 20% of the weight, and the cashew apple, 80%, they didn't do anything with it.
So we have a real-life Sam Zamore on our hands, the new cashew tycoon. Do you want to go into any follow-up you're going to take? Or are you going to invest in a farm?
Well, I'll tell you, you'd be really open about this because it's such an interesting thing. We went to meet with these farmers, and we're going to go through a due diligence. The processing, we're talking about getting triphasic energy out there. It's going to be very, very, very involved, and it's going to come down to the point where if we want to make this happen, we're going to need a committed team out on the coast and really, really good logistics, because this is the type of thing where we're going to have trucks. If this goes through, you'd have trucks driving on dirt roads where they could fall into a creek.
Now, what's that word you said, triphasic?
There's like single phase and double phase, which I think most of residential energy sources are. But, and again, I'm a beginner on this, but I think for commercial energy like machinery on big factories, they use something called triphasic energy.
Okay. And so you're talking about the energy that comes from a power grid that you use to plug in your air conditioner?
I think so. Again, this is something I'm just learning about, so don't take my word on it. But I realize that if you don't have triphasic energy for this type of machinery that we may use if we're going to make a juice or et cetera, it would be very, very expensive.
I understand. Yep. Always hurdles you don't know about, especially when you're exploring the coast of Colombia.
That's right.
Now, I've been in New York. You've been in Colombia. I've been actually wandering around town and kind of taking photos of all these expensive juice places. There are these juices that are all around in the city, and you buy them and they cost about $9 or $10 for 14 ounces. I tried one from a company called Organic Avenue, and it has it's a cashew hemp milk that has cashews and hemp seeds and chia seeds and dates. Matt, could I sell a $10 juice in Bogota?
I don't think so, man. I think you're going a little bit out of the range, maybe in those very, very niche organic stores in Rosales, but we're talking less than 1% market, nowhere near what people would sell in New York. And I also noticed, do you see that they spelled milk with a Y?
Yeah, they spelled milk with a Y, and I think that's because a lot of organic haters in the United States, these folks that are like, why are you eating this organic, or I don't need to eat gluten-free, they make fun of these replacement vegetable milks as not milk. So I'm guessing the milk with a Y is to kind of appease those haters.
Gotcha. Guys, today we're going to go into a really, really interesting podcast with a startup in Brooklyn that is now getting seven-figure funding into the company. What they are working on is a rating system so that consumers go into grocery stores and they know how good the product is.
Absolutely. It sounds like basically they have a secret sauce that tells you how good a company is on various variables, from organic and non-GMO ingredients to how large the company is, what do they pay their employees, that sort of thing. So, and they have a triple bottom line, which is pretty interesting. And Matt, that company is called HowGood, correct?
That's right. Well, we have Alex on the line, and I'm going to introduce him. Today we have Alexander Gillett, the CEO of HowGood. Alexander guides HowGood's business trajectory. Sustainability and ethics ratings are a good idea. Alexander made that idea a reality. Under his leadership, the HowGood ratings now support conscientious shoppers all over the country. Overseeing the business from administration to strategy, he has taken HowGood from concept to game changer. Alex, can you tell us why and how you started HowGood?
Sure. So we started HowGood back in 2007. And at HowGood, what we now do is we rate the sustainability of food products. So we've rated about 100,000 food products on their environmental and their social impacts. And then we partner with grocery stores and get those ratings printed right on the shelves next to the price tag. And we also offer consumers a free app so they can scan barcodes and see all the different inputs and outputs of a different product and start to be able to vote with their dollars. The idea originated when my brother moved to England, and we had grown up in a very kind of food conscious household. But when he was in England, there was this lack of kind of understanding of all the different brands and what it meant to buy from one or the other. And he realized what a process it was to start all of that from zero. And so we started talking about how much work it was and then how much more work it must be if you didn't grow up knowing a lot of the background information, and that there was a real need there, that people had talked so much about wanting to vote with their dollars. And you see it in surveys. Survey after survey talks about 70 to 80% of people, depending on which survey you look at, tends to say that they would support companies that share their values or want to buy sustainable food products or want to buy products that are good for their local economy. And over again, you see these massive numbers and are willing to pay more for these goods. But you don't see it when people are actually buying them. It's not like the organics make up 70% of the market. And so we started to say, okay, is the discrepancy because people are just lying on these surveys, or is the discrepancy because there's a piece missing? And we decided that we believe it's that there's a piece missing. And so when you give people the information, and we found that when a store uses our program, a best rated product throughout that store gets about a 31% increase in sales, which just shows you how much, once people have like a simple third party piece of information, how much they'll buy with their conscience. And that's really what we started HowGood to do. And that was 7 years ago.
Wow. And so it's 2007 and you're throwing around this idea with your brother. He's in England and you're in the States working at a different company.
Yeah, we're probably, when we first throw around the idea, it's probably 2006. He moved back to the States and we decided to start it in 2007.
Wow. And so what'd you do to get started on this? Did you build out a business plan, verify market, share it with friends? The day that you started to take it kind of seriously, like more than just a hobby, what was that day like?
I was running a construction company in Westchester, New York, of all places, and was wanting to get out of it. I'd had this whole vision for the way we could do things, and it wasn't happening. And so I was eager to make a change, and Arthur had moved back for us to do this together. And really, it was just, there's something here kind of a move, and just both being willing to take the risk. And also, I think because we were family, there's also a sense of trust that, hey, just quit your job and come back and we'll figure it out type of an attitude. We threw together a loose business plan, and we got some interest from some really big investors who all ended up saying no. But it got us interested, and they told us we needed to do certain things like write a business plan and all this stuff. And so we kind of followed these investors' suggestions in terms of what we were supposed to do. But the reality was, we didn't know enough about the market yet, and we didn't know enough about how consumers would engage with different ways of implementing these programs and all these different things. And so it didn't really matter. The investors always had one more step they wanted us to take, but never wanted to put their money where their mouth was. So I think we spent 6 months kind of doing that in circles, and then came to the realization at that point that we weren't going to get the money, but that we were really committed to the project. So what were our other options? And we had some of our own money that we had saved from our 2 jobs. So we took that and we started this process where one of us worked half-time at another job, and that funded both the company and both of our living and feeding situations. So for a year, Arthur would work half-time and half-time on HowGood, and I would work full-time on HowGood. And then the next year, I would work half-time on HowGood and half-time pulling in an income. And it allowed us to start partnering with different food experts and starting to build out the metrics of a system that to get accurate takes a long time and takes bring together a lot of parties. We spent close to 5 years doing that. We had some really cool things happen during those 5 years. Like we got stimulus funding, which allowed us to bring on 15 researchers to kind of build out this initial database and then start to do like our first initial in-store tests. But there was all this weird stuff. We were in New York City, and stimulus funding, it had all these requirements. Like it could only be spent directly on new employees and on nothing else. So it couldn't be spent on their computers or the rent or anything else. And we didn't have any income, and except for one of us working half time. And so how do you make that work? And so we had a lot of kind of unique, bizarre, bootstrapping style challenges. But we ended up with something where VCs were interested and where 100% of the stores that have launched the program are still using it. And we have these crazy sales increases. But we really had to stick with it and test out lots of different options and figure out where the consumer demand was to end up in the right spot.
Yeah, what a fascinating, it sounds like quite a ride. And I can only imagine. Alex, do you or your brother, do you guys come from a data analysis background?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I run the business side of the business, and Arthur runs the research side of the business. And Arthur worked in banks doing data analysis, specifically looking at different programs within banking to see how successful they were. So essentially scoring out different complex systems to see, based on the money put into them and the impact that they would have, whether or not they were a good resource, which for some people might not seem like the perfect thing for someone who wants to then come in and start rating the sustainability of food. But the reality is the hardest part isn't gathering the information, it's scoring it. And so the way that we kind of built the relationship with food experts is they would come in, we'd bring in lots of different points of views and debate the benefits or the impacts of different practices until we had clarity on known positives or known negatives or areas where there are unquantified risks or that whole side of things. And our research department could basically take that knowledge and, using Arthur's skill set, score it so that it could actually be transformed into a numerical equivalent that could be used within a rating system.
I see. That sounds tremendously challenging. And I know that from what I understand about HowGood, you guys try to take into account a bunch of different variables and try to make it easy for the consumer to understand. And I'm sure you have a bunch of internal data that lets you educate yourselves and then kind of transfer that education over to the customers. But just proceeding with this kind of story, did you guys ever hear people tell you, you guys are crazy, or what are you doing? Was there ever a time, why are you struggling? Why are you taking 3/4 of your time to work on this? Were there any doubters to this?
Not that many. I think most people, when we said what we were trying to do, everyone just thought it was so cool. There are a couple that spring to mind who were kind of older family members, I would say, not immediate family, but who were a little bit more skeptical in the beginning. And we had I think my brother used to say that he wasn't really sure whether we were making a good choice or not when we were living in England, because everyone kind of told him he shouldn't do it. And then he came back here on holiday and everyone he talked to said he should do it. And it's kind of one of the awesome things about America, really, is that there is this support for taking the risk and going for it. And I had this great teacher in school who said, if you're going to start a company, today is the day you should start it. Because every day after today, you'll have more responsibility, more debt, and more to risk if you're going to start a company. And that always stuck with me. So I was always looking while I was young to take those risks while I could.
So it sounded like you guys both had kind of the entrepreneurial bug implanted inside you at some point.
You know, my brother would probably say he didn't, but he's really good at it.
Okay, gotcha.
Like, he didn't have the drive to want to start his own company necessarily, but I think he's very good at it.
Excellent.
One challenge, looking over this company, looking over HowGood, is that It seems like you need to get three different parties to buy in. You have the food producers and manufacturers, you have the consumers, whether in the store or in the app, and then the grocery stores and co-ops themselves. So how do you guys incentivize all three of those parties to interact with HowGood?
Yeah. Well, so we were asking the same question, and we decided that the food producers were the ones that we were going to have to not incentivize. We go after our ratings without their approval, because otherwise only the best companies try and get approval. And you end up with this very skewed set of data where you can't really compare companies for their actual practices. And so we partner just with the grocers and then obviously with the end consumers in terms of showing them the data. And we end up looking at about 60 to 70 different indicators for each product, and it's product specific. So one yogurt, plain yogurt, will get a different rating from the same company than maybe their banana one will if they're sourcing their bananas from good or a very bad source.
How do you get companies to reveal their sources?
You'd be amazed at how much data is available. The issue, what HowGood is providing is less of kind of investigative reporting style, and it's more of big data gathering style. There's enough data out there for people to make extraordinarily informed decisions. The problem is you have to spend a week and a half to 2 weeks researching one product. So if you can centralize that process in a place like HowGood and then present it all in a very simple manner, then it's a very doable solution. It's the amount of information that you can get based on even just for conventional foods, right? If there's a conventional food being grown out of California versus out of Florida, it's about knowing all the different things that automatically go into that. What are the legally allowed pesticides? What are legally allowed fertilizers? What are the known labor issues in the area? And then looking for documentation that takes them anywhere above that. So you start right there, and then you start partnering with different watchdog groups where they can submit issues to you. And a submitted issue from a watchdog group doesn't go directly into a rating, but it might lead us down a path of paperwork where we end up finding legal paperwork that shows that there have been labor issues or different communities that have gone to court about certain types of spills or things like that, to the level where there's information where you can plug it directly into the label. Like if something is non-GMO certified, we know exactly what those standards are. They're highly scientific. We know that if for something to get that certification, it has to go through their process. So something gets that certification, and that will plug directly into our ratings. And so there's a whole balance of kind of automated and manual processes throughout our system. And when you do them right, it runs nice and smooth.
Now, any companies or any products listed with you guys, do they like to mention have you found this on their websites? We have a score of great from HowGood.
Yeah, we get a lot of requests for that. And at first we weren't going to do it, basically because we've been keeping this line between us and the producers so that it was clear that we weren't taking any income from the companies we were rating. The issue is that these companies that are doing well, they do want to promote that they're doing well, and they have a hard time doing that. So we are trying to figure out a nice way to do that, whether it's through a different third party or something like that. But as of right now, we don't have that solution quite mapped out, or maybe we just have a list online where any companies that we do work with, we publish that information so that there's transparency. When you're working in a company like ours, it's all based on trust and reputation. You've got to make sure that that there's a real level of transparency and that customers understand what may or may not influence anything. So once we figure that out, we will go down that route. We just don't know the best way to do it yet.
Okay. And what's the flow like of evaluating a new product? Well, you guys get a phone call from a supermarket and they say, hey, listen, we've got this new type of gluten-free pasta.
Yeah.
Figure out where it's from. Are they actually doing what they're saying? What are you guys going to do? Are you going to say, yeah, and you're going to go to google.com and type in gluten-free pasta made in, what's the actual process?
Yeah, well, the initial process will probably be looking it up in our internal database because we probably already rated it. We've typically rated about 75 to 80% of requests that come in from grocery stores. But in terms of building that rating, it's going to come in and it's going to be part of a bigger list, typically, of maybe 30,000 products that come in. We'll map out, let's say it's one of the ones that isn't rated. We're going to look through our database and see what connections we already have to that producer. So we'll probably have mapped out, let's say, other products that producer has already done. So we'll know their basic sourcing standards. We'll know where they get their different ingredients from. We'll then go and start looking up to see if they confirm anywhere online the same sourcing standards. We'll look for paid databases that are CSR reports, things like that. So we'll go look through those and see how their social side of things are going. And then we'll look up all the different ingredients that are in that package and specifically targeting ones that have known issues. And then we'll look for the sourcing standards that they have published about those. If they don't have any, we'll go to them to ask for proof that they weren't produced in kind of the standard method. And if they don't have anything that transparently shows that they have better than those standard sourcing practices, they'll get judged at that worst case scenario.
Okay, great. So now I want to jump in here. Listeners, you can find all show notes and links today and the bio of How Good on foodstartupspodcast.com/howgood. Now, if you're listening right now, here's how Good works. You go into a store and there's going to be a rating next to each product. You can also use the How Good app to scan and it will tell you the product if it's good, very good, and great. So those are the three scales, great being the highest, good being the lowest. Now, I wanted to ask you, Alex, a question. These three words, they're all, obviously they're positive, good, very good, and great. Now, choosing those words, I found it really interesting because do you find differences? For example, let's just say there's two different types of acai powder, and one is good and one is very good. Are you guys collecting data on the percentage that go for very good versus good?
Yeah, it's one of our favorite things about the program. And actually, just to elaborate on that, it's positive only, but we are rating all products. So a great rated product is the top 6% of products in the country. And about 60% of products don't achieve our basic rating. So they're just below our standard. So we don't put that on a grocery store because like something being organic or not, you just want to call out the best ones so that people can identify them without putting a big red do not buy flag on something. And that's important for grocers as well, because some people want to incorporate these type of decisions into their buying practice, but maybe they also have other things that are influencing them so that they have to buy some products that might not have those best ratings. You don't want them to feel bad about that. You want to have kind of give them the information at their fingertips and then let them be able to make the decision. And on the app, it also will go into all the details behind that. So it's not just the good, very good, or great. It also has the different things like whether it's local or what type of processing was used or what type of ingredients or fertilizers. And so it has all that information for people to be able to look up and see, and a damn fast barcode scan.
That's cool. And I wanted to go back for just 1 second. So, because we jumped over to your customers. Your customers, they're not the manufacturers or producers. They're the supermarkets and the co-op stores. Is that right?
Yeah.
And so when you guys started out, you mentioned to us in our kind of pre-interview that the first customers were these small and independent stores. So is that where you still get the most traction from, or you guys, how have your customers grown over the years?
Yeah, so we started selling the program about 2 years ago, as it is now. And our customers have really, it's a great upswinging graph in terms of the speed that we pick up new customers, and they are slowly getting larger. We don't have our first kind of 100-store chain yet, but the independents and the natural food segment and the co-ops are coming on really fast. And the amazing thing is that 100% of the stores that have signed on are still using the program. And the numbers in the store, and this is what I was going to get to for that last point, is, and the traction that we've seen is that those best rated products, they're seeing about a 31% increase in sales, which is wild in terms of actual impact, right? That means that within that store, every producer who's doing a best practice within being sold there, those best practices are being supported. And the companies that are looking at that product and seeing their sales shift from theirs to that product are then able to justify making better production practices because they can actually see the financial gain in doing so. And that's really the goal. HowGood's a triple bottom line company, which means that we derive our success not only out of the financial bottom line, but also the social impact and the environmental impact. And so that goes a big ways towards supporting exactly what we're trying to do. And we're having our first kind of 100+ store hopefully launch in about 3 months.
That's awesome. And this data, obviously, I mean, it's data-driven. Data is really important. I'm sure you've probably seen this. I know Danny and I have, that there's a lot of deception, even in the organic food space. So I think that's really cool that you guys are working on that and you're focused on that. And you mentioned earlier that there's tons and tons of public data. Are these like FDA databases that you pay for? Do you have to find special subscriptions? How does someone go about finding this data?
Yeah, it's a whole mix. So we have about 400 different sources that we use on a regular basis. And you guys could do a whole nother podcast with Arthur about him walking you through each one and which ones have what types of data. And especially, it'd be an interesting one, all the free sources, because you can gather huge amount of information from these different sources. The issue is that it tends to be very specialized data. And then there are the paid ones. The paid ones are great because they'll let us take we can import 60 or 90,000 food products data all at once and run that against the current data that we have. What we're often looking for as well is conflicting reports. So where we can flag different issues to have a researcher go and look for that specifically. And yeah, so it's a full range. I mean, I think for a general consumer, your best bets are really looking for the ones where their seals that you know are really helpful. So like how we talked about the GMO one earlier. That's a great source of information for people to be the non-GMO verified. Same thing with USDA organic or fair trade. Those are areas where there's clarity about what they're doing. And so you're able to go onto their sites and really look up and find details about products. And so what we're doing is we're taking all of that information and compiling it into a more simple direct-to-customer scoring system so that and also the positioning, rather than each packaging using a different label of their own, putting it on the price tag and basing all products so that they're ranked against each other rather than just pointing out the one or two things that they do well and that they're ranked by a third independent party.
Alex, I think that Matt and I were kind of thinking of the same thing, which is that one of your company's competencies actually helps other food startups with the transparency of information incredibly.
Right,
and
yeah.
Matt and I always chat about, hey, it's taken us 2 years to get something done. It's taken us 2 years to source. Here's an example, because my company works in cacao and chocolate. Lecithin is oftentimes used in making of chocolate, and it's oftentimes soy. And so that's something that your company, if you were looking at the back of a chocolate bar and trying to figure out what ingredients are actually going in there and if they're non-GMO, you try to take a look at soy lecithin, see where it's manufactured, see what common sources are maybe, and kind of try to figure out if they're using soy lecithin that's specifically non-GMO, or maybe look at alternatives. And then what a food startup might want to figure out is, hey, a company's using lecithin, but actually it's sunflower lecithin. Kind of reading behind the ingredients, because sunflower lecithin isn't non-GMO. So I think that's why Matt and I are talking about this all the time. So we're just like, man, this is great because, listen, we're both living in Colombia. We're going to be running around Colombia for 2 years trying to find this thing. And we can kind of make some headway in figuring this out from this company inadvertently. It might be a whole nother business for you guys.
Yeah, I mean, and that's where we said we want to kind of work with producers because we realize that the data that we have would be really helpful. And figuring out the best way to do that is an interesting one. And we really do want to do it. And we've got a couple of partnerships where we're going to kind of test things out and see how they work. And you'll see some posts go up on our blog about us doing that so that people are kept up to date. But
yeah, I think you have two companies. You have my company and Matt's company that can join that list if we're allowed to.
Awesome.
But no, it's great to see, and it's cool to see that you guys are using or leveraging data to such an extent where transparency has just grown.
Yeah, and I think the important thing for people to understand about big data, and this is true in any industry, when you hear the term big data, don't think perfect data. Like, there's no such thing as perfect data. But do think of when you see, let's take political predictions. When you see people who accurately predict which politicians are going to win which districts, they're using the same data that's available to other people trying to do the exact same thing. But they're taking that and they're presenting it in a way that's consistently accurate. And so with something like HowGood, go on and look at the products and see how they stack up to the areas where you have knowledge. Like for you guys, the knowledge for the chocolate bars, you could go up and look on HowGood about all the different chocolate bars that you know. And that's the thing that tends to win people over, is that when they know an industry really well, HowGood hits the right buttons. So yeah, it's an interesting thing. There's no such thing as perfect data, but it's better than no data, and it's better than uninformed decisions. So you just try and put that best information in front of people.
Great. To wrap this up here, what would you say your key strengths in terms of achieving success are? And where do you guys want to be in 5 years from now?
I think our key strengths were picking an audacious plan and then very conservatively going after doing it until it was at a place where we would get valuations from investors that made it worth it to take money. So we took a very slow process in the beginning until we had something that was very valuable, and then we put it in front of people, and that allowed us to raise money based on our terms, and means that we can now build and create the kind of rating system that we wanted to create from the very beginning. In terms of where we want to be, I mean, we want to be supporting people making more informed decisions, and we want to make it easy, and we want to make it right at the point of purchase. And so for us, really, the more stores that we can get into, the better. The more continents that we can get into, the better. The more people's hands and apps and whatever. If some non-crazy version of Google Glass comes about where there is interaction of that kind of level, we want to be a part of that so that they're projected right onto the product for someone walking through a store. And it's really just about continuing with the trend, right? People are asking for the information, and when they ask that question, we want to be the answer. On a side note, I was just thinking about it, a couple of different places that people could also go and look stuff up if they're completely unfamiliar. And those first names that I said, in terms of places they can look, they want some less kind of obvious ones and first ones that people might think of. Check out multi-ad, go to the ADA or the FDA, the EPA as well, Department of Justice rulings. And places like that are the places where you can really start to dig in terms of building out your knowledge of food products, in terms of new pieces that people might not know.
Absolutely. And I can't wait for you guys to expect. I want to have you guys back on the podcast when you guys are in China and trying to navigate all the regulatory environment and transparency there.
Yeah, you should have. Every week we get companies asking for us to create ratings for the supplement industry. And we keep saying no, just because we know the major impacts and we have the database of kind of mapping out the system. But the accuracy with which the data that's available is so poor that it would just be a massive risk to put the HowGood branding on it. It's just like, you don't really know where half the stuff is actually coming from in terms of the ingredients. And so there are huge segments of the industry, and let alone moving to other countries, where it gets really complicated. I mean, you see this issue all the time where people worry that the more transparent companies get punished because they're admitting that they're doing certain issues. And it does happen at times. And that's one of the things that with our system, we had to be really careful not to do.
I've seen issues, I've overheard issues about fair trade not being able to work in China and things like that. And so that's why I kind of brought up that last anecdote. And it's completely tough. When your data quality goes down, you can't do anything.
The same stamp for fair trade can mean different things coming from different countries. For one country, it can mean that it goes all the way down to the farmer. And for the next, it can mean that it goes down to a manager who manages the farmer. And it doesn't actually mean that the farmer themselves end up getting the money. And so one of the things that we do is all the different certification agents, we map all those out. What does it mean when this one does it? What does it mean when this one does it? What does it mean when this one does it in this country? So that when we're looking at their data, we're able to give accurate information.
Yeah,
Excellent.
you definitely don't want to end up like the Better Business Bureau. And in case people aren't familiar with that, that is probably one of the least rigorous in terms of measuring data on the quality of the company, but it's a pretty profitable business.
Well, Alex, listen, a pleasure having you on. Thanks a lot, and congratulations.
Oh yeah, we raised a $2 million round, and so we're implementing that now because we've had so many stores sign up for the program that we need more researchers, and we need to be able to speed up the process so that they don't have to take as long.
Well, best of luck. I mean, congratulations on the round, and it sounds like it's a really exciting time to be a part of your company and to be working on the things that you're working on. So congratulations as well, especially from having grown this up from the bottom.
And as always, if you have any questions or comments, find us online at foodstartupspodcast.com.